What the fuck just happened? What just happened? What just happened? So originally I had planned to discuss how fucking overpowered the bayonet and crossbow were, but then mid fucking like recording session the devs updated the game and fixed all of it. Holy shit, we got a ton to get into as far as the update goes. I'm gonna make another UIU2 video, but oh fuck, man. We got a lot to discuss. Don't worry, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. For now, let's get on with today's content. First off, we've got to cover what locations are considered dangerous. This pretty little graphic, with colored lines, details out the most dangerous parts of the map. The circles are locations, and the lines are routes. We'll start with the large pink circle, Henry's Hill. Now this place is the most dangerous location on the map by far, and it's earned its title for two reasons. Firstly, because the hill itself has two wolf spawns on it, which are good for a quick buck, and secondly, because below Henry's Hill is Western Cave, arguably the best cave for mining in the game. Western Cave is massive and it has every ore besides cobalt and platinum. It's also just across the river from St. Paul, the one town that colonists can smelt their ores in. Because of all these factors, Western Cave and Henry's Hill are usually loaded with players. Next we go to the small blue circle up at the top of the map. This little blue circle outlines the cliffs of Foul Caves, which is where you'll mine the best gold and platinum ores. This cave is a favorite of server hoppers, and because of that you'll have to be incredibly careful. Players will spawn in behind you and kill you before you even realize it. Traditionally, you'll find a bunch of combat log bags in the cliffs caves, and that's why. Next we've got our little red circle. That red circle is the Nigel's Cove bear spawn. It's a cave with a single entrance. 2 bears spawn in there, and because of that it's a great place to make some money. However, it can be very dangerous if you're not careful. That wraps up the most dangerous locations. Now we'll move on to routes. The green lines represent the most common treasure chest routes. You'll see people carrying treasure chests along these lines. People carrying chests often like to group up though, so you better stay clear of the routes if you can. Then finally we've got the purple lines. These lines represent the native route to the HBC fort. You'll run into lots of natives looking for a fight if you venture too far down these lines. And be careful, because natives can loot you without consequence. So those are the most dangerous locations. In an ideal world, you would be able to master this game without touching a single one of them. However, this is not the ideal world, so you'll have to go to these locations discussed at some point in your lifetime. Most probably for a long time, and most probably to farm. So let's discuss your own safety while I mine ores for rose gold. We'll start with what I call the server theory. If you're planning on doing something, let's say mining iron, server theory will help you pick the best server to do so. When it comes to farming activities, such as mining large amounts of ore or hunting lots of animals, people have basic assumptions about how that process works. Server theory takes advantage of these basic assumptions. So let's break it down. If you go into a small server to farm a specific activity, you are more likely to run into solo players farming that same activity. They are also under more stress because they're alone, and so they're usually hostile towards you. However, if you go into a large server to farm a specific activity, you are less likely to run into these solo players farming your activity, because they're in the small servers, but more likely to run into multiplayer groups completing the same activity that you would be in a small server. So TLDR, small servers have lots of singular hostile players. Big servers have groups of hostile players, but not as many groups of hostiles as would be singular hostiles in a small server, so you're a little bit safer. The advantage of being in a small server is that you're only ever fighting enemies one-on-one, whereas you'd be smushed by a group in a big server. And the advantage of being in a big server is that you experience less interruptions. There's less enemies fighting you in general, but if a group does decide to fight you, it's most likely going to be a big fucking group, and so you're not going to stand a chance at surviving it. So big and small servers have their pros and cons, and that's why I suggest sticking to one of 2 types of servers we're going to describe now. So firstly, I suggest going for what I call faction servers. Faction servers are servers where HBC and some faction are fighting. They've rallied so many that they've filled the entire server with combatants. Faction servers are hard to detect, but you'll know one when you see it. If you're in a faction server, you'll most likely hear lots of distant gunfire, and you'll most likely see nobody in JB and Paul anywhere during your farming session. Just stay below ground and you should be fine. Secondly, I suggest going for what I call mediocre servers. These are sort of the middle-of-the-road servers. They're not huge, they're not tiny. They're the servers no one really thinks about. And then lastly, before we move on, I wanted to address the obnoxiousness that is server hopping. As you'd expect, server hopping is incredibly dangerous and flies directly in the face of everything I just described. However, it is the best way to get the more valuable ores. There's no real tips for server hopping, so ultimately your survival boils down to reaction time and what you've got your gamma set to. I don't recommend it, but, if you need to, it is an option. Next is number 2. We're going to discuss situational awareness. When it comes to surviving out on the frontier, your eyes and ears are your best friends. You need to be aware of everything around you, every gunshot, every melee hit, every animal noise, all of it, because all of it can reveal what players are doing and which players are around you. So first up's hearing. Now, your hearing in specific is much more important than your eyesight, because it's the only preemptive warning you're going to get. So I recommend keeping any additional music off during travel and farming trips. Hearing is especially important in the mines, where you'll be able to pick up the footsteps or hammer click of a player behind you. This has saved me more times than I can count. I personally turn up my game volume all the way to 10. That way I can hear shots from across the map. It's very useful. I've gotten so good at it that I can differentiate between the guns firing. Hearing will give me a vague idea of how many combatants are present and, what they're fighting with. It's incredibly useful. So let's move on to eyesight. If you can run your game with 8 graphics, I suggest you do. It gives you the highest render possible without lagging the game to shit. Additionally, I suggest fidgeting around with your computer's gamma settings. This is the screen's color brightness settings, if you didn't know. Every computer has a different way to edit your gamma, so you'll have to look up yours on your own time, but every computer does have the settings, so you will be able to find them. Increasing the computer's gamma increases the screen's default color brightness, which allows you to see better in, caves and whatnot at night. It's very handy for server hopping and for mining without a lantern. In fact, that's mainly what people use it for. I suggest turning it off at daytime or in a snowstorm, though, because it will literally blind you. So lastly, we're going to discuss loadout. The weapons you bring along can make or break your trip to the frontier. You can bring, bows, crossbows, muskets, rifles, even a blunderbuss if you want. But in the beginning, I suggest bring a weapon you're good at, a solid safety weapon. I'd prefer to use a bad weapon I'm good at than a good weapon I'm bad at any day of the week. Bring a primary you're comfortable with, and, bring a melee you're comfortable with. But as far as secondaries go, there's no reason you shouldn't bring a Prussian. With all of that said, though, some weapons are better for survival than others. In my opinion, the best weapons to bring along are the ones that are just as useful against one player as they are against a group of players. So we're talking bayonets and crossbows in specific for primaries. Bayonets and crossbows are both great against multiple enemies. Both weapons deal great damage up close using very little stamina. In the crossbow's case, it uses no stamina at all. I definitely don't recommend bringing a bow or blunderbuss, though, as the blunder is not remotely useful against anyone unless you're fighting at point-blank range, and the bow takes so long to draw that you'll be shot before you even fire off. So when fighting multiple people, it's all about hit-and-run tactics. That's why I typically bring along a saber or a tomahawk as my melee. I don't want to use a melee that runs me out of stamina because I have to have some sort of escape if shit goes south. And if I can run faster than people chasing me while parrying their hits with a melee that uses very little stamina, I can escape. On the topic of escapes in specific, there are some tactics I would recommend when it comes to 2v1 scenarios. These aren't as common as 1v1 scenarios, but they are still very common. I'm not going to give a lot of tips for 1v1s, though, because, that's pretty much a standard fight. Everyone knows how to, win in a 1v1. When it gets to a 2v1, you want to pick the place you're fighting. Lead them somewhere you know, or set leg hold traps down along the way to throw them off. If you're instigating this 2v1, i.e. attacking 2 players, you want to take one of them out as a first priority. Get one of them out of the picture so the fight becomes a 1v1, then close the distance and beat the other with your melee. Don't let the second player fire off his weapons, because then you'll be fucked. The best way to take someone out quickly, though, is to use a blunderbuss, a quick switch, or a tomahawk quick switch. I personally use the Tomahawk quick switch in 2v1s, which is a tactic I describe in my Things the Pros Don't Want You to Know video. As a general rule of thumb, I try to catch the people I'm about to engage in combat in chat before, actually engaging them in combat. It really helps. If you don't know what I mean by catching them in chat, catching them is something you do where essentially you ask them like a lengthy question or a question that gets them into their chat box immediately before attacking them. So, like, I'll go up to an HBC guy and go like, "Hey, what like fucking company are you in?" I'll ask something like that, and then they'll start typing. This way, they can't defend themselves immediately. They have to exit out of the chat bubble before blocking, parrying, or anything else like that. It really helps, trust me. Any seconds you can get yourself, keep you alive, and it's just great in the long run. So that pretty much covers it. Pick your servers well, keep your volume up, take good weapons, and you'll be good to go with Surviving the Frontier. Honestly, a ton of this is just, learned through experience, The better you get at the game, the more experience you get in set locations, the better you know the map, the easier it is to pick your fights, easier it is to escape, and honestly, the more you survive. I on average probably kill about 5, 6 players per mining trip just because, I server hop and I land on lots of people. Um, I'm kind of spiraling here. Fuck, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, okay, I remember now. Um, Next couple of days, I'm going to release another UIU2 video. We had a massive update that just came out. Definitely want to talk about that. Thank you all for watching. Damn, is this the longest video I've produced? Yeah, it will be in a couple seconds, and now it is. Hot damn! All right, see you folks later.